Hi guys, so for this week, week 6, I chose the first prompt, which says the lecture compares structural injustice to a poorly arranged room, where some stumble repeatedly not because they're clumsy, but because the setup itself is a disadvantage. Can you think of a system or a structure in our society that functions this way? And there's a few other things that go with it. For me, I immediately thought of just like the justice system overall, specifically like the prison system. And in the classes that I'm taking, we are looking a lot at just the overall criminal justice system. And so let me continue reading the question. So it says, how does recognizing the role of systems, not just individuals, deepen or challenge your understanding of sin, justice, and the Christian call to love our neighbor? So it's kind of a loaded question, but I think that when just like looking at the criminal justice system, you can definitely relate it to like a poorly arranged room, similar to the lecture. And that certain people don't just stumble because they have a disadvantage or they're, like less immoral or something, but because the structure creates a disadvantage for people. And I think there's a lot of different situations you could apply this to, especially in the system, like cash bail or over policing in certain areas, so there's more arrest in those areas, or even we look at the overall structure of the system when people go in for a certain crime, pay their time, and then as soon as they are out, repeatedly do the same thing. It kind of makes you question the structure of our system and how, there's so many different things you could apply to. But I think just looking at it and how it challenged my understanding first of sin, and then justice, and then the call to love your neighbor. I think so. For sin first, I think growing up in a church, you kind of understand sin as like a wrongdoing, like for a personal choice or for something you did, which is absolutely true. But I think like looking at the criminal justice system, it can show that there's a lot of brokenness that's embedded in the structure and how that can set people up to not succeed. And so I think that kind of challenged my perspective of looking at this as sin, And then for justice, I think that, justice is punishing like a wrongdoing. But justice also means examining whether a system itself is fair and if it is failing. And I think that is a just thing to do. And so if certain groups are more likely to fail, like I think that it is just to go and look and to call for higher, if that makes sense. And then for the last part, so connecting it to loving our neighbor, I think loving your neighbor, it cannot stop by just a personal kindness. I think if my neighbor is repeatedly harmed by a system, then love calls to notice the pattern. And Christians love, because they are first loved. And I think that it is to love your neighbor, we're called to also look at the systems that harm the neighbor, if that makes sense. I don't know if that thought process made sense, but yeah, so I think those are kind of my thoughts on it. And it's definitely a complex topic and a loaded question. I think you can, there's a lot of different opinions, but yeah.